Hi, my name is Renee Moorefield. I'm CEO of Works. We are more connected than ever, and we're more disconnected. My conversation with biotech leader Eva McLellan changed how I think about why. It's not fragmentation anymore, it's fracture. This month's newsletter is about the deeper work of leadership in a fractured world and the one question that leads back to flourishing. I hope you enjoy it. Before we dive in, I'd love to know you've had such a wealth of experience as an executive in a number of roles, and I'd love it if you'd give me kind of a brief history of your journey. So the brief history of Eva, if you don't mind.
I've had the pleasure and privilege of finding what I love to do early. Two things is science always drove me, curiosity around how the world works and how the body works, and then people. And so, I would say my passion and my interest and my real kind of commitment has always been to, you know, taking on interesting work. I happen to be in the healthcare industry on figuring out how to, change trajectories of human health, whether it's, well-being or, as science advanced, curing disease, which is what Roche does and why I've been here for 18 years and I've loved it. And on the other hand, as I started to tap more into the kind of, well, what does it take to change the trajectory of human health? It's actually people, right? It's about healthy leaders leading in a healthy way and having good connections and unlocking potential in others. So then that's basically, I would say, what drove me from the scientist through to the kind of strategist, and then I would say now organizational synergist. Does that make sense?
It
Organizational
does
synergist.
make sense. So, yes, say, help me to, understand the word synergist. So, I have my own definition of what that means, and it's this, and sort of a holistic. What does synergist mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I love this kind of concept of like there's like teams, groups, and then ensembles. A team being something like, you're working with a team towards a goal. A group is kind of like loosely a collection of people, again, working towards a mission. And then an ensemble is, I would say, people that are loosely connected with each other, all progressing their individual contribution to the bigger aim, but kind of alchemy of sorts. So you kind of synergize them together so that the combination of their work, even though that's not always super linked, would be bigger than the sum of its parts. And so that's the word that kind of came to mind. I also talk about this concept of integrated leadership. So I guess maybe synergizing and integrating what maybe seems like loosely collected connective tissues across an organization, but actually are so fundamental and essential to producing extraordinary outcomes. Is what's coming to me at the moment, but not a formal definition, just I guess how I experience it now as a leader.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So, in your own journey as a leader, what has enabled you to thrive, or what does thriving mean to you in the middle of all your complexities and demands and all the pressures that you've been facing?
Yeah. I think thriving for me means being well on like multiple levels, emotional, physical, spiritual, and professional. Having a lot of passion and wholeness in terms of how you are as a professional, but also balancing your spiritual, your relational, and your intellectual. And so I find when I'm not thriving, it's probably easiest to kind of point out what thriving is when I myself I've experienced when I'm not thriving. When I'm not thriving, I'm putting too much energy or an disproportionate amount of energy in one energy field, like my professional or my spiritual, even the spiritual part. You spiritual and the kind of emotional and the intellectual. You can over index on one of these, and I find when those are out of balance, I'm not thriving. And there's a lot of diagnostics. You have an amazing diagnostic to like look at leaders and kind of get them to pause and see where they are in their wheel. But there's also very simple ones I use, which is just like the wheel of
Mhm.
thriving, like connection, profession, growth, finances, spirituality. Like, where am I on that wheel from 0 to 10? And very often you can kind of tell, like right now where I'm at, I'm missing relational.
Hmm.
Uh, It's like connection with friends. I've moved a lot of countries in the last 6 years. So while I have a really strong bond since I was like, in elementary school, the country moves have kind of removed me from the frequency and the intimacy of those bonds. And so that's one of the things that I'm out of balance on right now. And I'm trying to figure out what, still living in Switzerland and miles apart from some of those connections, how do I just pepper that more in terms of my second half of the year? So a pragmatic example of like identifying, oh, what's off balance here, and then kind of reinterjecting. Other times I had intellectual imbalance. Like I was really missing like an intellectual challenge, and then I kind of really wanted to feed that, to nourish that, so that I feel like I'm thriving. And as you know, Unlocking Eve was born out of that kind of need to thrive, and then that took a life of its own for a couple of years. So I think it's just being in tune with yourself, of what you're yearning for and maybe what you're hungry for in the moment.
Yeah, and I find personally, and for the people we work with, is it also the answer to that question, what does it mean to thrive, changes over
Hmm.
different times of your life, seasons of your life as well. So different
Hmm.
things become more important, the intellectual challenge versus the relationships, etc. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate that very simple model, the wellness wheel, that supports people and saying, okay, from a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being kind of my best self, my best expression in this area, and one being maybe not as well resourced in this area, what would that look like for me? So in your synergist role, and you said, organizational synergist, but I also see you as someone on the world stage that is looking at what's happening as far as human health around the world. So my sense of you, we don't know each other really well, but my sense of you and just kind of watching you and following your work is that you're not just focused on the company you're working in, but you're really looking more broadly around the world. What do you think it means in this time of real disruption and change that most people are experiencing at some level, either consciously or unconsciously? In fact, I saw a report the other day. It was a fabulous report. I can't remember the journal it was in, but it was talking about global inflammation, how we are in a period of real global inflammation. So, what do you feel like thriving means, looks like, sounds like, could be like? What can you imagine for human thriving in this period of real global disruption?
That's such a wonderful question, and I'm actually curious to to hear from you too, because like myself, you and I kind of look at this holistically and try to make sense of, I think, what is emerging. Um, I think the world has always been complex, volatile, uncertain, complex, and now that complexity maybe is more apparent because of just availability of information, social media. We kind of get bombarded with the information. So I'm still on the fence of like, is it more complex now? Was it always complex? We're just more aware of that complexity. But as I was going around the world, as you know, and kind of getting curious about it, and talking to people and reading, now I'm a bit more convinced that the world was fragmented, but now we're walking into a more of a fracture.
Hmm.
And so then my question was, I was just thinking about this as I was preparing for this. So what was the role of a leader in a fragmented or disconnected world? I mean, maybe the role of the leader was to kind of that relational role, right? To connect the fragmentation and to lead through complexity by, through connection. But what is the role if our hypothesis is that the world shifted even more to fracture?
Hmm.
What's the role of a leader in a fractured, just a little bit more, like a little bit different reframe. So if you have a fracture in a bone, it's like if you don't heal it or take care of it, it will break. So how do you as a leader become the kind of the container to move things forward in a fractured world? And the fracture, I think, is at all levels. I think fracture is happening in small microcosms in organizations and at the world stage. I don't think it's just political.
Hmm.
I think we're feeling it everywhere. I'm certainly feeling within organizations that, just 8 years ago I was working with had a bit of a different makeup. And so then I think that the thing that I reflect on a lot, or I have been reflecting on a lot, and this is going to sound very non-scientific, but very real for me in the moment, is hope.
Mm.
And the definition of hope, there's many, but one definition of hope is the belief, the belief that things can be different, and that you personally and collectively have the agency to make it so.
Mm-hmm.
So then if I break down that, what do we need from Fracture World? We need hope. And how do you operationalize hope as a leader? Well, one is belief that things can be different and the relational capacity it takes to kind of lean in on that. And then the second is your personal agency and autonomy to make it so,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of inspiring that in others. I just read an article recently that leaders are leaving their positions because they've lost their sense of agency. They've lost their sense of what is my contribution, and do I have enough agency and autonomy to actually make a difference? And so I think creating environments that both are highly relational, that connect ourselves to something bigger, connect ourselves, to our peers, and to what we're up to here. But then also making sure that you're creating environments as a leader or as a contributor or whatever, that where people feel that they have the autonomy and the agency to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of tension is what I'm working through right now, around kind of keeping hope in a world that seems it seems negative and unhopeful, but looking for positive models, positive examples, and positive interactions, and then, getting into action, but not an action like a transactional way, but in an integrated way, and with people that are willing to do the work that it takes to lead at what I would say in much more difficult times than maybe we've experienced in the recent past.
Yeah, yeah, there's so much that you said there, Eva, that I relate to, I believe, I connect with personally, but also in all of our work and working with leaders around the world. You're really describing to me this polarity that can seem like it's in tension, this polarity between agency and communion, agency and relationship and connection. And
Mm,
it seems like it can be one or the other. We can over-index on being very individualistic, agent, over-index on being very connected. Sometimes, even an agile organization can sometimes over-index on that. And there's this balance between the two that I think you're describing that I find as a leader, but as in working and growing leaders, there's another level of nuance about all of this. So I'm with you that I also don't know. Is the world really, are things more complex than they were before? Are we just way more aware of them? I will say I hear the word uncertainty more than I ever did in the past. Just people feeling like they don't have a sense of ground. And so, in the middle of that, um, I know from a physiological, just from my own background as an exercise physiologist, kind of that we move to this place when we're uncertain and we don't have ground, we move to this place of looking for something to hold on to. And we move often from fear and reactivity. So there's something in that too, that as you mentioned, hope, the word that came to my mind is inspiration, like leaders that see human beings not as human resources, but truly as already creative, resourceful, whole, already with the innate capability to thrive. And now let's tap into that. So, what can we create together? You mentioned it before. Okay, this is an uncertain time. What can we create together that we couldn't do alone? And that, the bringing of people together in a different way with sort of a different sensitivity to what people are going through, but also knowing we need to get results. We need to get things done in the middle of all of this. We need to create innovations. We need to finish projects. We need to serve clients. We need to do all of these Yeah, I think the role of leader for me has so shifted, from 35, 40 years ago when I started doing this work. Of course, then it was much more about management and control. It's so shifted now to how do we create an environment, even in the feeling of uncertainty, how do we create our own sense of security? And that security is going to come more often now from inside us, not from the outside world or from our organizations. And that is the process of human development. So leadership has become so much more about human development, individually and collectively. And many leaders that we're working with really get that and want to figure out how to, be on that journey. But I imagine there's lots of leaders that are like, I'm also dealing with all this. I'm also in the middle of all this uncertainty and not sure what to do with myself either. So I'm agreeing strongly with everything you said about kind of this polarity, and also that on one level, life has always been uncertain. It really has always been temporary, that there's always been this temporal. So we've been kidding ourselves to think that all these things were kind of locked in place, that life was locked in place, and that our titles were secure and our roles were secure and our everything has always been changing. So now we're becoming more aware of that, the innateness of change in our lives and our families and our teams and our organizations. And so it's another level of learning how to relate to change in a whole different way. How can we be friendlier, have a friendlier relationship with change itself?
Yeah. And I think, the more experience you get with change at an early age, I think the more muscle you build. And so I think change is good for that sense. Like if change is if change is always constant, the more change you get to experience and then work through, the better you become a change and the more you can help others. And so I think one of the ways is that, recently I felt quite destabilized, right? There's lots of uncertainty. I'm leading a relatively large, important priority, moving countries, moving into this new priority. I felt a bit uncertain. I was talking to someone about it and they said, well, how does it feel? I said, well, it feels like I'm climbing, just to give you like the personal vulnerability piece of it, because this is
Yeah,
real for
yeah.
individuals and leaders at whatever scale that you're leading. I mean, it's all relative. Um, and I said, look, it feels like I'm scaling, so rock climbing, scaling it without a harness. And I'm like quite high up. It's like very visceral. And then he said, from all the times that I've known you, the way you're speaking, and I was kind of speaking about the context. He says it feels like you're disconnected from yourself. Maybe you're
Mm,
disconnected from others, and you're disconnected from the system.
mm,
And you are a person that needs connection to self, others, and system. And when
mm,
you have that, you can move mountains, you can be resilient, you can help others. And that's when I stopped and thought, oh my gosh, he's right.
mm,
First, I'm disconnected from myself because I have over indexed a bit on the work priority. I haven't connected with my family and friends for a while, so not disconnected from peers at work, but family and friends, and that's kind of putting me out of balance. And I am questioning what is the role of our industry in health and well-being of others.
mhm,
I didn't explicitly say that, but if our job as a healthcare industry is to bring health and well-being of others, how are we making sure that the health and well-being of the people that work in the organization is also well taken care of so
mhm,
that we can take care of others? And that was a big challenge for me. And so I think, kind of my conclusion from that, and we also talk about this with integrated leadership, is connecting to self, connecting with others, and connecting to system, and doing an audit. Am I disconnected at any one of these levels? And if you're disconnected at all three, which I happen to be about a year ago, if you're disconnected from all three, it can feel like you're climbing a rock without any harness. Typically, you're connected to three harnesses. You might be
Yeah.
disconnected from one second, but if you're disconnected from all three, that can feel really scary. So I really appreciate, and I can really, I think, relate to people that are feeling this way right now. If you're feeling like, wow, I'm climbing a rock, quite high up, and I don't have any harness, check in with yourself. How is the connection with myself? How's the connection with those around me, friends, family, colleagues? And am I connected to the system, whatever you define as your system? And just do an audit and see if there's one or two connections missing. And in the case if there's three, yeah, just get connected. And that's what I did. I kind of reconnected on two of those fronts. And now I'm working on the third.
Yeah,
So
that's great. What do you think, what belief did you, and maybe it was an unconscious belief, but what belief did you start being driven from that you think led you to kind of free solo? Because you're describing free soloing up kind of the rock face. What do you think what belief was driving you at that point?
yeah, what a great question. I just think I wanted to get up there to see the horizon so I can help others. Like it was like, okay, we can't see the horizon. It's
Mm,
very complex. Let me just climb up this mountain or climb up this rock, take a look what's on the horizon, climb back down and report back so that we
hmm
can all get to a clarity and safety together. But it's like we can't climb it up without connection to self, others, and system. You have no
Yeah,
harness. So
yeah,
luckily I only got half the mountain and then I was able to safely climb back down and
yeah,
say, let me get the three harnesses first and then still do the same job
right.
solo, but with that connection. And I've never shared this with anyone. This is my first time sharing with you, Renee, but you have this ability to unlock insights from others. So this conversation for me is as much as a reflection as it is a conversation, so I hope you don't mind. I'm freestyling with you,
I
but it
love
was
it.
a it was my value of stewarding and that value that I have as an older sister and as a responsible person to say, let me go check the landscape. It's so complex and uncertain right now. Let me just go and climb up and see what's happening on the other side so I can be better for myself and others. But you cannot do that if you're not well resourced.
Yeah.
And for me, the resource was connection to self, others, and system.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic metaphor, not just a metaphor, but a practical example. Even as you're describing, I can literally feel goosebumps across my chest and down my arms of thinking of that experience of those times when I've also been in a situation where I want to get ahead of things because I feel a lot of care and responsibility for other people. And yet then I get out there and it feels for me lonely. I feel like all of a sudden I go, oh, wait a minute, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I realize I don't have all the resources I need, whether it's the belay system or whatever it is. So I appreciate that, the metaphor itself. What did you notice for yourself? Like, what were the signals for you that had you pause halfway up the mountain to say, oh, wait a minute, I need to take an audit here. Did you notice anything physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically? What did you notice for yourself that really gave you the indication? Or was it that conversation with your colleague?
The conversation with my colleague was a result of me feeling drained,
Okay.
uh, feeling less joy,
Hmm.
which I typically do, feeling less magnetic than I typically am. You know me, I'm energy, producing and energy giving as well as energy kind of creating. And so I was thinking, oh, wow, I'm having a little bit less joy. Everything feels a little bit tougher. I haven't experienced this level or in this before in a while. So I think it was joy and energy. Those are the two things that I look at a lot more now than I used to do in the past. What's my energy like? What's my joy like? Um, and um, and then yeah, joy and energy. That was kind of my two things that I was auditing myself, and I felt drained. I felt like I was having a little less joy, and I I studied this stuff in addition to practicing them. So I think once you do that, I'm talking to people probably that don't practice this as much every day or don't study it as much as I do. For those of you who don't know, I'm a practicing executive, but I'm also a bit of a yeah, a social researcher, amateur on the side. Founded a foundation called Unlocking Eve with my co-founder KV Tug, and we've been studying ourselves and others in situ for the better half of the last 5 years. And so, Renee, maybe that's those audits come to me in a little bit more natural way now, and I look for markers like joy and energy, which I would have never looked for before.
Hmm.
Before I would be like, my results weren't as good, or this wasn't, or there was tension. Now I'm like, joy and energy is down. Everything else is also going to be a consequence of that. I got to check in.
So I ask you that number one to kind of hear what are your signals, but also your question before about what is it that, or the conversation we were having before about is what is it, what are the almost new nuances or new skills that it's important for us as leaders to really make part of how we live and lead in a way that maybe we didn't before, and that is understanding what are these signals. What are these signals? Personal signals, what are the signals for the collectives, the groups, the teams, the extended networks that we are leading? What are the signals that we can see and that we can feel and that we experience and that we're hearing from people that help us know we need to stop for a second. We need to pause and kind of strategically reflect on what's going on here and what support is needed that maybe, or what resources are needed that we don't have today. And yours being hope and joy, because I know you've used our assessment, but in the debrief, the assessment is just a tool. It's just an opening for a conversation. I mean, I love it, but it's just a tool to open up a bigger conversation. And at this point, about 5,000 leaders have used it. I've done many of those debriefs and those kind of journeys with leaders. And although all of us have this innate capacity to thrive, to be creative, resourceful, whole, the way people define it is very different. So yours, hope, joy, energy, might be very different than someone else that's saying, I just didn't feel challenged anymore, or I felt too challenged. I felt over challenged, like I'm putting so much energy into this, but with a lack of ground. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is for someone, but to know what that is for another person, for themselves, those signals are so important. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes I have a signal where I didn't feel challenged enough, and that drained my energy as well. Like when I talked about the wheel, that was like this intellectual stimulation was not there, and I know I need that. And a couple of years ago, that was the thing, and then you had to obviously figure out how to unlock that. So I do think it's different for every person, and I think it changes over time.
Yeah.
And so, those of you who resonate with what we're talking about today, maybe just because it's that season for you. Those of you that don't, just come up with your own definition. But I think, at all levels, like checking in with yourself first, whatever your markers are, whether it's challenge, joy, energy, peace. I have a wonderful co-founder, Kavya Tug. Her marker often is peace, whether she
Mhm.
feels that peace. I'm like, wow, that's wonderful, right? So I think it's all of those things. And then on a team marker, I think trust. I think the observable behaviors of trust. And trust is a funny thing. It is not really noticed when it's present, but boy, can you notice it when it's absent.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes I take it for granted, go through long streaks, I would say years of these the trust is just a given, and then when there's uncertainty and pressure and uh all of those things that you've described, and the business world is going through all of those things right now on multiple levels, whether it's the geopolitical situation that is causing strain on our economic markets, whether it's the healthcare industry dealing with all kind of slew of economic as well as political challenges, while still trying to serve, whether you're the Red Cross, the International Confederation for the Red Cross, and kind of having an extra burden in terms of the humanitarian work that you need to do at a lower ability because of the funding being cut. Like I can give you examples across industries right now. They're all going through those things. And that's where I think all those values that we espouse, trust, transparency, collaboration, all of those values, which I think human beings deep down inside all want and sign up for,
Mhm.
that's when they get challenged in situ in real life. And so how do you hold on to those values while the whole world wants to rapture you? Last night I had another conversation with another friend, again preparing for this conversation. I asked him kind of about his point of view on a couple of these things, and he says, human beings, we're fragile.
Mhm.
We're really fragile. Even a chimpanzee could probably put a wedge between us. And
Mm.
so how do we know that, one of the things that has made society and civilization and humans so extraordinary is our ability to do extraordinary things in groups, is our ability to, to trust another, and when things get tough. And so I think you can observe things around trust that then starts to fracture in terms of communication. That communication then can spiral into lack of psychological safety, and then you start to see it in results.
Mm.
I think that's how you see it observably. But if you kind of go back, how do you make sure that you live your espoused values? And if you kind of stumble, that's fine. We all have espoused value probably to stay healthy and go to the gym at least a couple of times. I'm going to say a couple of times a month, not to make people feel bad. And some of us a couple of times a week if we're lucky, but sometimes we don't. We get up in the morning and we don't do it. We have a value to be healthy, but we just don't follow with the behavior, and that's okay. Giving yourself grace and saying, "Hey, that's not my value," but somehow, today that's how it showed up, but tomorrow's another day, and another day, and another day, and kind of trying to stay in alignment with that and helping others do the same when the world is trying to pull you apart.
I love that you brought up trust, and what you made me think of is when, the word fracture that you used at the beginning, and when the world feels fractured, and then our relationships start to fracture, when trust seems to break down. We also have the power of apology, apologizing, and forgiveness. And I mean, these are ways of healing and repairing a relationship that as human beings, I think we're getting to learn how to do in a much bigger way. I mean, when I kind of look at what's happening in the world and some of the breakdowns that we've already discussed, the positive side of that is what is it allowing us to step into as new skills and new capacities and new ways of connecting? And I don't think we're talking enough about the power of the apology, the power of honoring the breakdown, apologizing, forgiving, knowing that there is no one on this planet that's perfect.
Mm.
And then you mentioned grace, and that, the power of the grace we can give each other for not being perfect human beings and really seeing each other in a whole new way. So thank you for bringing up trust, because I think when it comes to our flourishing or thriving, a lot of it has to do with, what does it mean to us personally? But so much of it has to do with our relationships. We thrive in relationship. And so much of what we gain, how we gain energy, how we gain well-being is not just individual. It's with each other. It's what we create together. So these kinds of skills, the building of trust and the repairing when it's not, when trust breaks down, I think is another level of skill that is really important. I want to go back to something that you asked because I know we don't have a ton of time left. And you mentioned something about you've been thinking about the pharmaceutical industry itself. So I want to now talk specifically about pharmaceutical biotech industry, um, and what the role it really has in human health. And I would expand that to human thriving, because human health, if we're talking about, many people think of health, the real definition of health, the underlying definition of health is very similar to thriving, but how people normally think about health is more physical. So, can you say a little about what you're thinking through? Maybe you don't have it fully thought out yet, but what you're thinking through as far as what is the role of the pharmaceutical industry and biotech in advancing human thriving?
Yeah, I think by definition, just if I were to kind of take the most simplest definition is the healthcare industry as a whole, which the manufacturers of medicines and diagnostics are a one part of that ecosystem. Our job is to make our contribution to human thriving as it relates to preventing, treating when necessary, and then curing, where we can. I think prevention is a big responsibility we have to society. And that I've been bullish on that when I was a general manager in Slovenia, working with the government there to make sure that we are not just, delivering band-aids, but we are also looking at society as a whole and how do you help society thrive? I mean, economically, the GDP of a society depends on healthy individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And finance ministers often think about, how many, what's our GDP and what's our proportion of working population, but the question is, what's your proportion of the healthy working population, and how do you keep people healthy and thriving and working? But that's a very kind of textbook explanation of how I look at it. I think let's do the three concentric circles. I think as a leader in an industry that is looking at thriving of human health, you have to look at yourself and see, how do I drive the culture of high performance with well-being?
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to be an integral part of your metric system as you would any other metric. So how am I driving high performance, and how do I make sure that I'm setting up the culture for consistent thriving, i.e. well-being? So I always have a metric of high performance and well-being. And sometimes when I get new, go into new jobs, I say, okay, this is my metric on high performing with well-being, and say, well, why are you calling out with well-being? It's well, because I don't want to leave it in a separate pillar called people and culture, because the performance depends on the design. Any performance depends on the design, and the human design component of it is as important as the organizational design. And then by 6 months, I get them there. And then when they see the results, like, oh, I got it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you got to put in your matrix. And then when you think about the job of the pharmaceutical and biotech industry in society, I have this wonderful line. I just looked it up because I wanted to, what is our social license to operate?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a license to operate in terms of medicines and diagnostics, or EMA and FDA. But what is our social license to operate? We have this explicit mandate to be a business, and then we have permits to deliver our products and services to the market. But you also have to sustain and maintain the social license to operate your business within the community in which you are in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think seeing yourself as part of an integrated whole, and I'm lucky that we work for for a company where those values are very, very real, and we don't live them every single day. But I think because it is still a majority proportion family owned, you can look to the long term and say, if we're not a good citizen in making our contribution to the social license to operate in the communities they're in, that means not extracting more than you take, that means a fair exchange for what you do, and that means contributing beyond that, then society won't keep us around.
Mm-hmm.
And they shouldn't keep us around. And I think a lot of companies are coming to that realization. There was very few of them, I would say 50 years ago, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, and now it's becoming more in fashion, but I think it has to become the norm. So Patagonia is one that's been doing this for a while. You've got IKEA that's been doing this for a while. You had Paul Polman with Unilever, who's also practiced those principles. And I think Roche is one of those examples away. But I want a world, and I want to contribute to that world where I'm still operating at this level to making that not the exception, but the norm.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I know that as we have worked with Roche for a number of years, I have told people it's one of the most purpose-driven companies that I've experienced. No matter where we were in the system, you could feel that same ethic throughout the system, and that was palpable. So it really speaks to what you're talking about. I know we only have about another minute, so I wonder if there's anything we have not talked about that you would just love, you wanted to make sure that we did talk about. Anything that you haven't had a chance to say that you would love to say to anyone who's listening to this.
Yeah, what's coming up to me is be a gardener. Like you talked about we talked about a couple of companies and environments that are leading the way, but we need to nurture that.
Hmm.
We need to make sure we nurture that. We don't take that for granted. So wherever you are, whatever microcosm that you're accountable for, start with who you are, start with where you are, with what you have, and make it just a little bit better. If we all did that, um, not every day, but every day we have the energy to do it. I think, person by person, conversation by conversation, we're going to continue to nurture those environments until they become the norm. So, and then the other thing is, Renee, like, thank you for everything that you do. I mean, you have unwavered on the thriving work. You've been doing this, I think, for over 25 years. You've helped us, both in the professional sense, but you've also helped share your research with Unlocking Eve. And, we're building on the shoulder of giants, of people like you, to extend the thinking and the learning and the generosity that you have provided, at least the people that I know you work with, and myself included. So, I don't know, just a big thank you for your unwavering, consistent, and innovative approach to doing this work. And I learn from you every time I talk to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's a privilege. It is a privilege. I mean, I think being on the planet during this time, it's a real privilege to get to do this kind of work and to do it together. So thank you.